Kale wiped the sweat from his brow as sparks flew from the metal he was shaping. The workshop was quiet, tucked at the edge of the mountain, where cold winds whispered through cracks in the wooden walls. Outside, the village slept, unaware that a small story was about to begin. Kale liked it that way. He worked late when no one could see his experiments, when his thoughts could move freely, and when the quiet made him feel like he was the only person in the world. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal was suddenly broken by a faint sound. A soft breathing, careful and almost afraid, came from the corner of the workshop. Kale froze, holding the hammer midair. He squinted into the shadows, his heart quickening. Nothing in the village moved at this hour, nothing except for the wind. The sound came again, closer this time. From the darkness, two small eyes appeared, glowing faintly in the dim light. Kale blinked. They were not human eyes. They were bright, curious and strangely intelligent. A small dragon, no larger than a big dog, stepped forward. Its scales shimmered faintly, reflecting the sparks from Kale's forge. Its tiny claws clicked softly on the wooden floor as it approached the scattered tools, its tail flicking with both caution and interest. Kale's first instinct was fear. Dragons were creatures of legend, feared for their power and cunning. But this dragon did not move with the threat of a predator. It moved with curiosity, almost like a child exploring a new toy. Kale lowered the hammer slowly. "Hello there," he said quietly. The dragon tilted its head, studying him. Its eyes did not show anger or hunger, only wonder. It sniffed the air around the scattered tools, letting out a tiny puff of smoke that smelled faintly of burnt metal. Kale realized that it was not here to harm him. It was here to understand. He took a careful step forward. "Do you want to learn?" he asked, unsure why the words came out. The dragon blinked again, then padded closer to the pile of gears and scraps. It nudged a small cog with its snout, pushing it across the floor as if testing what it could do. Kale's fear melted into amazement. He had spent years inventing machines, creating tools that no one else understood. And now this little dragon seemed to grasp the basics almost instinctively. The night stretched on. Kale worked and the dragon watched. Sometimes, it reached out with a claw to touch a hammer or a piece of metal. Sometimes, it blew a small puff of fire that melted a tiny edge in just the right way. Kale laughed softly. "You're smarter than you look," he said. The dragon chirped, a sound almost like a laugh itself. He decided to let it stay. After all, who else would understand him so easily? Outside, the wind grew colder, rattling the edges of the workshop. Kale finally stopped to rest, wiping soot from his hands. He noticed that the dragon had curled up beside the tools, resting its tiny head on a pile of bolts as if it had found a pillow. Its chest rose and fell gently, the soft smoke from its nostrils rising into the air. Kale stared at it for a long moment. The villagers had always feared dragons, but here was one that was small, innocent, and surprisingly gentle. He wondered how it had found him. The mountains were vast and dangerous. Most dragons would avoid humans or attack without hesitation. But this one had come here alone, choosing his workshop as a safe place. Kale realized something important. This was not just a wild creature. This was a being capable of thought, curiosity, and perhaps even trust. By morning, the world outside the workshop had not changed, but something inside it had. The dragon had explored every corner of the room, nudged every tool, and watched Kale work with eyes full of wonder. It seemed to understand more than Kale could explain. It was not just observing, it was learning. And Kale knew deep down that legends were often born from small beginnings, quiet moments that no one saw coming. He named the dragon Siren, a name that felt right as he said it aloud. Siren blinked up at him, its eyes shining with something like recognition. Kale smiled. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we will see what we can do together." The dragon chirped again, curling closer to the warm glow of the forge. As the sun rose, its first light spilling into the workshop, Kale looked around at the scattered tools and the sleeping dragon. A bond had begun, delicate but strong, built on curiosity, trust, and the strange magic that comes when two different worlds meet. No one in the village knew what had happened that night, but Kale felt it in his bones. Something extraordinary had begun. The villagers would talk of strange lights and sounds in the mountains. They might whisper about dragons, but they would not know the truth, that a tiny dragon child had slept beside a human's tools and that by morning, a legend had quietly taken its first breath. Kale returned to his workbench, careful not to wake Siren. But his thoughts were no longer on the machines alone. They were on the possibilities ahead. Together, he and the dragon child would explore, invent, and discover things neither could achieve alone. And in the quiet of that morning, the world seemed just a little bigger, filled with wonder, promise, and the first spark of a story that no one would soon forget. Kale woke before dawn, the cold mountain air creeping through the cracks of the workshop. Siren was already awake, tiny claws tapping lightly on the wooden floor as it inspected the scattered tools from the night before. Its scales glimmered faintly in the early light, showing shades of green and gold that seemed almost alive. Kale watched quietly, smiling to himself. He had expected a wild creature, unpredictable and dangerous, but Siren was calm, curious, and patient. "Good morning, Siren," Kale said softly, approaching the dragon. Siren's head lifted, eyes bright and alert. It chirped, a sound like a gentle whistle, and nudged a small hammer with its snout. Kale knelt and picked it up, examining the tool. He realized that Siren was trying to communicate, not just play. Its gestures were deliberate, thoughtful, and full of curiosity. Kale decided to start teaching. He laid out simple tools in front of Siren: a hammer, a few nails, a small metal plate, and a tiny anvil. "We will begin with the basics," he said. "The hammer is not just a strike. You must understand control. Watch me first." Kale demonstrated carefully, striking the metal in a way that bent it slowly and precisely. Sparks flew, but only where he wanted them. Siren's eyes followed every movement, tail flicking with interest. Then it was Siren's turn. The dragon nudged the hammer awkwardly at first, but soon it adjusted its grip with surprising skill. It tapped the metal in small bursts, then breathed a tiny, controlled flame to soften the edges. Kale's jaw dropped. The dragon had learned instinctively how to combine fire and force to shape the metal. It was as if Siren understood the principles without explanation. "Good, Siren. That is exactly it," Kale said, clapping his hands softly. The dragon chirped happily and nudged a nail toward the plate. Kale guided Siren's claws, showing how to drive the nail in slowly, controlling the force. Siren tried, making small dents and bending the nail at first, but with patience it began to improve. Within hours, the little dragon was hammering nails with surprising precision, its small fire adding just the right heat to make the metal bend smoothly. Days passed in the same rhythm. Kale taught and Siren learned. Each day, Siren's curiosity grew. It began experimenting on its own, picking up odd pieces of metal and attempting new shapes. Kale would watch, sometimes helping, sometimes letting Siren discover solutions by itself. He realized that the dragon had a mind for invention, a natural sense of mechanics and magic working together. The villagers began noticing strange lights and sounds from the workshop. Sparks flew late into the night, and soft puffs of smoke curled from the chimney. Some whispered that Kale had gone mad, working with dangerous forces. Others spoke in hushed tones about a dragon in the mountains, but none dared approach. Kale did not mind. He knew Siren was safe, and that was all that mattered. One evening, Kale brought out a more complex project: a small wind-powered wheel that could lift tiny weights. "This is for understanding motion," he explained. Siren watched, head tilting as Kale demonstrated. Then it was the dragon's turn. At first, it blew weak puffs of fire that did nothing. But Kale guided Siren, showing how to focus the flame and push the metal at the right angle. Slowly the wheel began to turn. Siren chirped, tail flicking with excitement. It nudged a small gear into place and the wheel spun faster. Kale laughed in delight. As the days went on, Kale noticed more than Siren's skill. He saw patience, careful observation, and even creativity. The dragon would try things Kale had never thought of: tiny metal bridges, clever levers, and small traps that could test strength and balance. Kale realized that he was not just teaching Siren, he was learning from the dragon too. Its magic combined with instinctive understanding made him see machines in new ways, ways he had never imagined. One afternoon, a strong wind shook the mountains. The workshop's door rattled and Kale worried for Siren. The dragon, however, seemed unafraid. It perched on a low shelf, wings tucked, eyes calm. Kale approached, feeling a new sense of trust. "You are brave," he said. Siren chirped softly and nudged a small tool toward him as if sharing courage back. By nightfall, Kale and Siren had built a small contraption that lifted a tray of metal scraps using fire and levers. Siren breathed carefully at just the right spots and the tray moved smoothly. Kale stepped back, amazed. "We are learning together," he said. Siren curled up beside the tools again, eyes closing in satisfaction. The firelight reflected on its scales, making it look like a tiny moving flame. Kale thought about the world beyond the mountains. People feared dragons, feared change, and feared anything they could not control. But here, in this small workshop, a dragon and a human had begun to understand each other. They had begun to build something new, something stronger than fear. Kale smiled, realizing that knowledge, curiosity, and trust could overcome fear in ways swords and armies never could. That night, Kale watched Siren sleep beside the tools. Its small chest rose and fell gently, the soft smoke from its nostrils curling in the air. He felt hope, a strange and powerful feeling. Perhaps one day the world would see dragons not as monsters, but as partners, as allies in invention and discovery. Perhaps one day the stories whispered in fear would change into stories of wonder. Kale cleaned the workshop, leaving small tools within reach of Siren. The dragon would wake soon, ready to explore more, to learn more, and to teach Kale things he had not yet imagined. And Kale knew, deep inside, that this small beginning would grow into something extraordinary. Together, human and dragon, they were starting a story that no one in the village could yet understand. By morning, Siren would have learned more than any human could teach, and Kale would have seen the impossible become possible. And in the quiet mountain workshop, a legend was quietly taking shape, one hammer strike and one breath of fire at a time. The wind carried a strange tension that morning. Kale was finishing a small gear assembly when a shadow passed over the workshop. He looked up, heart tightening. Siren's ears twitched and its tail flicked nervously. Something was coming. Kale went to the door and peeked outside. A group of men, armed and heavy with armor, moved steadily up the mountain path. They were not villagers. Their stance was purposeful, disciplined, and their eyes were cold. "They've come for you," Kale whispered, looking at Siren. The dragon crouched low, scales bristling slightly. Kale had always known that dragons were feared. Now the fear had arrived at his doorstep. These men were sent by the king, or so Kale guessed. They believed dragons were dangerous weapons, creatures to capture or destroy. And they had found Siren. Kale thought quickly. The workshop offered little protection. Wooden walls could not stop swords or arrows. He needed a plan fast. "Siren, stay close," he said, voice low. The dragon chirped softly, understanding the urgency. It followed him as he gathered tools and materials. Kale's mind raced. He could not fight them directly, they were too many, too well armed. But he could use the terrain, the workshop, and Siren's abilities to their advantage. The men arrived at the door, knocking heavily. "Come out, human," one shouted. "The dragon is coming with us, alive or dead." Kale took a deep breath and stepped back. He had no intention of surrendering Siren. The dragon stepped beside him, small but fierce, wings tucked, eyes bright with determination. The first man raised a hand to strike. Siren reacted instantly, blowing a small but precise jet of fire at the man's armor. The heat was enough to make him stagger back, screaming. Kale seized the moment, throwing a small metal plate that hit the second man in the face, giving them a few precious seconds. Siren's quick thinking surprised even Kale. The dragon was small but clever. It moved with intelligence, darting under weapons, nudging tools to block attacks, and breathing small bursts of fire exactly when needed. Kale ran toward a hidden lever in the corner of the workshop, one he had built but never used. Pulling it sent a heavy metal chain swinging down, blocking the entrance. The men cursed, trying to push through, but Siren used the chaos to its advantage. It leapt onto the chain, gripping it with claws, breathing fire to distract the intruders. Sparks flew, metal twisted, and the men found themselves trapped in the doorway momentarily. Kale grabbed Siren's claw. "We have to go now." He ran to the back exit, leading the dragon through a narrow passage that wound around the mountain. The men recovered quickly, shouting and throwing javelins, but they could not follow easily. Siren's small size and agility made them faster than human soldiers expected. Kale realized the dragon's instinct for survival was incredible, and combined with its intelligence, they were unstoppable together. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Kale noticed something remarkable. Siren was learning from the fight, observing each attack, each movement of their pursuers. It began to anticipate, positioning itself to block arrows, nudging rocks to roll down the slope, and using fire to create smoke screens. Kale marveled at the dragon's quick thinking. This was no ordinary creature. It was clever, loyal, and fearless. Hours passed, the men finally losing ground as the path became too steep. Kale and Siren reached a small ledge overlooking a valley. They paused, breathing heavily. The dragon curled up, wings wrapped tightly around itself, eyes still alert. Kale looked down at the valley below, realizing they had escaped for now. But this was only the beginning. The king's men would not give up easily. They saw dragons as weapons, as treasures, or as threats to be destroyed. Kale knew he had to prepare Siren, to teach it not just how to manipulate tools, but how to survive, how to think, and how to trust humans who believed in it. As night fell, Kale built a small camp, using rocks and scraps of metal to form a hidden shelter. Siren watched silently, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Kale spoke softly. They will come again. We have to be ready. But together we can outsmart them. Siren chirped, nudging his hand as if promising loyalty. The bond between them had strengthened in the heat of danger, cemented by trust and the understanding that each depended on the other. Kale spent the next days teaching Siren small survival skills, blending human strategy with dragon instincts. They moved silently, observed the movements of the soldiers from afar, and built small devices to block paths or create distractions. Siren was quick to learn, and Kale realized that their combined intelligence was more powerful than any army. The dragon's mind and the human's ingenuity formed a partnership that no one had expected. Villagers, hearing rumors of strange fires and clever tricks on the mountain, began to speak in awe rather than fear. Tales of a small dragon evading capture spread quickly, and Kale realized that Siren's presence was already changing the way people thought. Not all humans would see dragons as monsters. Some would see them as beings capable of learning, feeling, and creating. One night as they rested under the stars, Kale looked at Siren. "You are more than a dragon," he said. "You are my friend, my partner, and maybe one day a legend." Siren chirped, curling closer, small smoke spiraling from its nostrils in the cold air. Kale smiled. They had survived the first attack, but the real test was only beginning. Together they would face more threats, more challenges, and more dangers. But he knew in his heart that their combined courage, cleverness, and trust could overcome anything. By morning, Kale and Siren were ready to move again. The valley below was calm, the soldiers gone, but their pursuit would return. Kale packed tools and small inventions, while Siren inspected the gear, ready to assist in any way possible. They had survived the threat, but more importantly, they had learned that together human and dragon could think faster, move smarter, and fight in ways no one expected. And as they disappeared into the mountains, shadows blending with the night, Kale knew something extraordinary was growing. Siren was not just a dragon child. Siren was a partner, a teacher, and a force that could change the world. Legends were beginning to form, quietly and carefully, in the bond between a human and a dragon who had learned to trust each other against the odds. Kale and Siren moved quietly through the mountains, careful not to leave signs of their passage. The morning sun cast long shadows across jagged rocks and hidden valleys. The air was crisp and fresh, and Siren's small wings twitched as it sniffed the wind, alert to every sound. Kale noticed how alert and intelligent the dragon had become. Siren seemed to understand not just danger, but the possibilities of invention, strategy, and survival. Together they were more than just human and dragon, they were partners. After several days, Kale realized they could not hide forever. The king's soldiers would keep searching. If they wanted Siren to survive, they had to move beyond simple evasion. They had to teach humans to trust dragons and show the world what their combined abilities could achieve. Kale looked at Siren and smiled. "We are going to change the world," he said. Siren chirped softly, nudging his hand as if agreeing. They returned to a hidden valley where Kale had noticed a small group of humans who lived in isolation, inventors and tinkerers like him. These people were curious and brave, willing to listen where others would fear. Kale introduced Siren carefully, watching for fear or hostility. At first the humans froze. Dragons were creatures of myth, creatures of danger. But Siren did not roar or threaten. It examined their tools, nudged gears, and gently blew small, controlled puffs of fire. The humans watched in awe. Slowly, fascination replaced fear. Kale began teaching them what he had learned with Siren. Tools and machines could work with the dragon's fire, combining magic and human skill in ways no one had imagined. Siren demonstrated simple tasks, melting metal to shape parts, operating small levers, even helping assemble moving pieces. The humans began to experiment, their ideas merging with Kale and Siren's. Within days, the hidden valley became a hub of invention. Sparks flew from forges, smoke curled from chimneys, and strange machines moved as if alive. Word spread quietly. Travelers who passed by whispered about a dragon in the mountains, a small creature working with humans. The story fascinated people. Rumors of impossible machines and clever inventions began to circulate. Some came to see, others to learn. Kale and Siren welcomed those willing to try, teaching them to work with the dragon instead of fearing it. It was slow, careful work, but change was beginning. People were starting to see dragons not as monsters, but as partners capable of learning, helping, and creating. Meanwhile, the king's soldiers had not forgotten them. They scouted the mountains looking for signs of Siren and Kale. But the human and dragon duo had learned from their previous encounter. They set clever traps and built hidden paths that confused the soldiers. Siren's small size and intelligence, combined with Kale's strategic thinking, allowed them to remain one step ahead. The king's men grew frustrated, realizing that the duo was more than they had expected. Stories of a metal dragon and a human genius began to spread across the land, inspiring awe and fear in equal measure. One evening as the sun dipped below the peaks, Kale and Sirin tested a new invention, a small mechanical cart that could carry supplies, powered partially by fire and partially by simple gears. Sirin blew precise bursts of flame, turning a tiny furnace inside the machine. The cart moved smoothly over rocks and dirt, carrying small loads without human effort. The humans who watched gasped, amazed. They had never seen anything like it. Kale smiled. "This is just the beginning," he said. Sirin chirped, tail flicking with pride. Kale realized something important. Sirin was not only intelligent but also creative. The dragon began experimenting on its own, using fire to forge shapes Kale had never considered. It melted metal into intricate patterns, shaped tools that moved with precision, and even created small machines that reacted to their environment. Kale and the humans learned from Sirin as much as Sirin learned from them. Together they were inventing a new way of life, one where dragons and humans could collaborate instead of fear each other. At night, Kale would sit beside Sirin, watching the dragon curl up by the forge. "People will come to understand one day," he said. "They will see that we can do great things together." Sirin chirped softly, smoke spiraling gently from its nostrils. Kale felt a deep sense of hope. This hidden valley was becoming a place of change, a place where dragons and humans could explore, invent, and create without fear. It was a small beginning, but every legend started small. Days turned into weeks. Kale and Sirin's work attracted more humans willing to learn. They built workshops, experimented with new machines, and shared their knowledge carefully. The hidden valley became a symbol of hope, a place where cooperation and intelligence mattered more than fear. Even travelers from far away came to witness the strange dragon who worked alongside humans, inspiring stories that would eventually reach distant lands. Kale watched Sirin one night as it inspected a moving gear mechanism, gently nudging parts into place with its claws and fire. He realized that this dragon had grown beyond a simple companion. Sirin was a teacher, a guide, and a partner in invention. Their bond had become a legend in the making. The humans around them were learning, growing, and beginning to believe that dragons could be more than legends of fear. They could be symbols of progress, curiosity, and hope. As the stars filled the sky, Kale felt a deep pride. They had faced danger, survived attacks, and built something extraordinary together. Sirin curled up beside him, eyes glowing softly in the firelight. Kale whispered, "The world will know our story one day. And it will be a story of trust, courage, and creation." Sirin chirped softly, a sound full of agreement and joy. In the hidden valley, the wheels of invention turned. Fire, metal, and intelligence combined to create machines no one had imagined. Humans and dragons began learning from each other, forming bonds stronger than fear. Legends were quietly growing, not from battle or conquest, but from curiosity, trust, and the courage to work together. And Kale knew, as he watched Sirin breathe small puffs of fire at the forge, that the world was on the edge of something extraordinary. By morning, travelers and inventors would gather to witness the strange alliance. The story of a human and a small dragon, learning together and creating wonders, would spread quietly but powerfully. And Kale understood that they were not just surviving, they were shaping a future where humans and dragons could change the world together. The morning sun painted the mountains in gold as Kale and Sirin prepared for another day. The hidden valley was alive with movement, humans carrying tools, checking machines, and following Sirin's precise instructions. The small dragon had grown slightly since their first meeting, scales shining brighter, eyes sharper, mind keener. Kale watched proudly. What began as a simple friendship had become a force that could change the world. But peace was fragile. The king's soldiers had not given up. Scouts had reported strange lights and unusual machines in the mountains, and the king's curiosity had turned into anger. He believed that if dragons and humans combined forces, his control over the land would weaken. A larger army was coming, better armed, smarter, and relentless. Kale knew this confrontation would decide the future, for Sirin, for humans, and for every dragon that might one day walk the earth without fear. Kale gathered the humans who had joined them and spoke softly but firmly. "We cannot fight them with swords alone. But we can outsmart them. Sirin and I have learned that cleverness, trust, and creativity can defeat any force. We must use everything we have built to protect ourselves, and to show the world that dragons are not weapons but allies." The humans nodded, fear tempered by determination. As the army advanced, Kale and Siren prepared the valley. Machines were positioned along narrow paths, levers hidden, small traps designed not to kill but to slow. Siren tested each mechanism, breathing precise bursts of fire to ensure each worked. Kale had created simple but effective devices: rolling boulders triggered by levers, nets woven from metal threads, and small carts that moved on their own to distract and confuse. Together, human and dragon had made the valley nearly impossible to navigate without understanding their plan. The army entered the mountains, confident and unafraid. But they had not faced a dragon who could think, plan, and act with a human companion. Siren darted from hiding, blowing small flames to startle and mislead the soldiers. Rocks tumbled down paths, strategically placed nets tripped horses, and carts moved seemingly on their own to block paths. Kale guided the humans, giving instructions, adjusting plans on the spot. The soldiers were confused, struggling against traps and illusions. Siren's small size became an advantage. It zipped between soldiers' legs, nipped at their heels, and used clever bursts of fire to push them off balance. Each movement was calculated, never wasted. Kale marveled at the dragon's intelligence. Siren was no longer a child learning from him. It was an equal, a partner who could anticipate problems and act without instruction. Together they were unstoppable. Hours passed and the soldiers realized that brute force could not win. Their formations broke, their leaders frustrated, and their morale fell. Kale and Siren continued to use ingenuity, combining human invention and dragon instinct. They were moving like one mind, one force, flowing through the valley with unmatched precision. The army finally began to retreat, unable to understand the clever strategies that had defeated them without a single human or dragon being seriously harmed. When silence returned, Kale walked among the humans and Siren. The valley was quiet, save for the soft sound of machines humming and the small chirps of the dragon. Kale felt a deep sense of pride. Together they had defended themselves without violence that would destroy life. Together they had shown that intelligence, cooperation, and trust were stronger than fear, swords, or numbers. The humans who had joined them looked at Siren with awe. They had once feared dragons, but now they saw something different, a creature capable of learning, teaching, and protecting. Siren chirped happily, nudging small machines to make them work smoothly. The bond between dragon and humans was stronger than ever, and Kale realized that this valley was becoming a symbol, a safe place where humans and dragons could explore, invent, and grow together. Word spread beyond the mountains. Travelers carried stories of a small dragon and a human genius, a partnership that had outsmarted an army. People began to think differently about dragons, not as monsters to fear, but as intelligent beings capable of learning and helping. The world was slowly changing, and Kale knew that this was only the beginning. One evening, Kale and Siren stood atop a cliff overlooking the valley. Machines moved below, humans worked beside dragons that had come quietly from the wild, curious and gentle. Kale smiled at Siren. "We did it," he said. "We've shown them that dragons are more than legends of fear. They can be friends, teachers, and partners." Siren chirped softly, curling its tail around Kale's arm. It was a sound of agreement, of joy, and of pride. Kale thought of the future. Humans and dragons working together could change the world in ways no army or king could ever control. Knowledge, creativity, and cooperation would spread like wildfire. New inventions, new ways of thinking, and new alliances would grow from this hidden valley. Legends were no longer just stories, they were real, living, and inspiring. As night fell, Kale sat beside Siren near the forge. Flames danced, reflecting in Siren's shimmering scales. "Tomorrow we build more. Tomorrow we teach more. And one day the world will understand what we have begun," he whispered. Siren nudged a tool toward him, small fire curling around its claws as if to emphasize the promise. The dawn that followed was different from any other. Light spilled across the valley, showing humans and dragons working side by side. The mountain paths that once carried fear now carried hope. Kale realized that their story, human and dragon together, was no longer just their own. It belonged to everyone who would come to learn, to see, and to believe. By morning, the valley was alive with movement, sound, and energy. Children watched Siren with wonder, learning from the small dragon's gentle guidance. Adults marveled at the machines and clever inventions. Travelers and villagers whispered stories of the human and dragon who had outsmarted an army, changing the way they thought about dragons forever. Kale looked at Siren, eyes full of pride and affection. The dragon child had grown, learned, and taught in ways he had never imagined. Together they had survived danger, built trust, and inspired a new world. A new era had begun, not through conquest or fear but through courage, intelligence, and friendship. And in that quiet valley under the rising sun, Kale and Siren stood together. The mountains no longer seemed like barriers, but like guardians of a legend in motion. The human had found a dragon, and the dragon had found a human. Together they had started a story that would live forever. A story of trust, creativity, and hope. The world beyond the mountains would never be the same. Dragons and humans, once divided by fear, were beginning to work as one. And legends, born from the smallest beginnings, had finally come to life.